Alien girl crashed into a human's home and says, "You're my husband. Why don't you remember?" It was a rainy Thursday night. Quiet, still, boring. Evan Reeds, 27, a freelance app developer, was in his garage workshop, coding in silence with headphones on and a half-finished coffee by his side. The blue glow of his monitor cast shadows across his unshaven face as his fingers danced across the keyboard. Lines of code reflected in his tired eyes. The only company he'd kept for days. Outside, raindrops tapped against the roof like impatient fingers. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a storm brewing, much like the emptiness inside him that he tried to fill with work. Suddenly, a flash of white light lit up the sky, and then, boom! Something crashed in his backyard. The impact shook the house, rattling windows and knocking over his coffee mug. The dark liquid spread across his desk, seeping into his notes. Evan tore off his headphones, heart racing, and grabbed a flashlight. "What the hell?" he muttered, pulse pounding in his ears. He hesitated at the door, wondering if he should call someone first, but curiosity pushed him forward. He ran outside into the rain, expecting maybe a fallen tree or a busted transformer. Cold droplets pelted his skin as mud squished beneath his shoes. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing broken branches and displaced earth. But what he found was a half-buried metallic pod, sparking and steaming in the mud. Its surface gleamed despite the darkness, covered in symbols he'd never seen before. A faint humming emanated from within, like a heartbeat, and inside it was a girl. Or at least, she looked like one. She had glowing silver hair that seemed to move with a life of its own, red-tinted skin that pulsed with an inner light, and faint blue lights running through the veins on her arms. Her clothes were strange, torn, sleek, and definitely not earth-made. She looked hurt, dizzy, vulnerable, yet somehow powerful. Evan stood frozen, rainwater streaming down his face, mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. This wasn't possible. This wasn't real. And then, her eyes opened. She looked straight at Evan, focused, calm, familiar. Her eyes were deep violet with flecks of gold that seemed to shift and change like galaxies being born. "You finally came back to me, my bonded one," she said softly, her voice like a memory he couldn't quite place. Evan stumbled backward, nearly slipping in the mud. "What the hell? Who are you? What is this?" His voice cracked with panic, hands trembling as he pointed the flashlight directly at her face. The alien girl squinted against the light but smiled, an emotional, relieved smile, as if this encounter was the most normal thing in the world. "You don't remember me. That's okay. You told me you might forget, but I never did. You're mine. We were soul bonded in Arvalis, a place your kind only visits when dreaming." Evan blinked, speechless. This was a hallucination, right? Was he dreaming? High? Had he fallen asleep watching science fiction again? He pinched his arm hard, wincing at the pain. No, he was awake. But she wasn't disappearing. She wasn't fading. She was standing, breathing, real. The rain passed through the strange energy field surrounding her pod, never touching her skin. "Lady, whoever you are, I've never left Earth, let alone soul-bonded anyone," Evan shouted over the increasing rainfall, frustration mixing with fear. "And I don't even date, let alone whatever this is." The alien girl stepped out of the pod, movements graceful despite her apparent disorientation. "Your world is fragile. Your mind forgets. But I remember everything. I searched for you across systems. I tracked your energy pattern. And now I'm here." She stepped closer, her hand raised slowly toward his cheek. Evan froze, every instinct telling him to run, yet something deeper rooted him to the spot. The moment she touched his skin, something clicked inside his brain. Flashes, a glowing sky of emerald and purple, a silver sea that moved like liquid mercury, a soft voice whispering something he couldn't quite hear. The feeling of complete belonging. Then, gone. What the hell was that?" Evan whispered, his legs nearly giving out beneath him. "A memory you locked away, for safety. You said, if I ever reached your real world, you wanted to love me from the beginning again, with a human heart." Her fingers lingered on his skin, warm despite the cold rain. He stumbled backward, breathing heavily. This couldn't be real. And yet, it felt too real to deny. The crash site, the strange metal, her otherworldly presence, all tangible, all present. Lightning flashed, illuminating her strange beauty. In that brief moment, something in her expression, longing, hope, and ancient patience broke through his defenses. "We should... You need to come inside," he heard himself say, surprising even himself. "Before someone sees you..." Evan brought her inside, his rational mind screaming in protest, while something deeper pushed him forward. He gave her a blanket, soft, blue, the one his mother had knitted years ago. She accepted it with reverent hands as if he'd offered her something precious. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the couch while he paced the living room floor, leaving wet footprints on the hardwood. "Just sit while I figure this out." She obeyed, perching on the edge of the couch, her posture too perfect, too alert to be human. She studied everything like a curious child: TV, walls, lights. Her expression was part wonder, part heartbreak. "Is it still the same?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Your dwelling? In my visions there were more. Living things, plants, colors." Evan stopped pacing. "Visions? You've seen my house before?" "Through your eyes, when we connected." She touched her temple. "Sometimes, when you dream deeply, I could see fragments of your world." "That's impossible," Evan muttered, running his hands through his wet hair. "I would remember something like that. I would remember you." The alien girl looked down at her hands, where the blue lights beneath her skin pulsed slowly. "The separation was painful. Your mind protected itself by forgetting. It is a defense mechanism of your species." "And what exactly is your species?" Evan demanded, keeping his distance. "We are called the Luminari, from a world you would pronounce as Nelvanus." She pronounced the word with musical notes that seemed impossible for a human throat to produce. "We exist in both physical and energy states." Evan collapsed into the armchair across from her, exhausted and overwhelmed. "Why me? Out of billions of humans, why crash into my yard and claim we're... what was it? Soul bonded?" "Because it is true," she said simply, her eyes never leaving his face. "Our connection was not random. It was destined. Formed across dimensions when your consciousness wandered beyond your physical frame." When he said he might call the authorities in the morning, her face changed, fear for the first time, breaking through her composed exterior. She looked up and said softly, "If you hand me over, my core will collapse. I'm not supposed to survive without the bond being reconnected. I waited years for you." Something in her voice, the raw vulnerability, made him pause. "What's your name?" he asked, realizing he hadn't even thought to ask until now. "In your language, the closest would be..." She made a sound like wind through crystal. "Lyra. You called me Lyra." "Lyra," he repeated, the name feeling strangely familiar on his tongue. "And you expect me to believe that in some other dimension, we were... what? Married?" "Soul bonded is deeper than your concept of marriage," she explained, eyes earnest. "It is the twining of essences, the sharing of life force. It cannot be broken, only forgotten." That night, Evan tried to sleep on the couch, giving his bedroom to the strange visitor. But sleep wouldn't come. He stared at the ceiling, mind racing with impossible theories. Was he having a breakdown? Was this an elaborate hoax? Or was the impossible sitting in his bedroom, real as the rain still pattering against the windows? She emerged silently from the bedroom, moving with that unnatural grace. She sat nearby, silent, watching the window. The moonlight filtering through the curtains gave her an ethereal glow, making the lights beneath her skin shine brighter. Then, just before dawn, she whispered, "You told me once, if I ever found you again, and you didn't remember me, I should remind you not with words, but with how I look at you." And when she turned to face him, her eyes held such profound recognition, such complete knowing of him, deeper than anyone had ever looked at him, that something inside Evan resonated like a struck bell. "Why do I feel like I have seen you before?" he whispered, barely audible. Lara smiled, hope illuminating her face. "Because some things," Evan reads, "are too profound for even your mind to fully erase." Morning arrived with pale sunlight that made Lyra's skin shimmer. Evan had barely slept, his mind a battlefield of doubt and strange familiarity. He found her by the window, hand pressed against the glass, watching birds with fascination. "They're just sparrows," he said, voice rough from lack of sleep. "Common birds." "On my world, nothing flies free," she replied without turning. "The atmosphere is too dense with energy particles." Everything swims rather than flies. Evan moved to the kitchen, desperately needing coffee. His hands shook as he filled the machine, spilling grounds on the counter. I should be calling scientists, or the government, or a psychiatrist. But you won't, Lyra said, now standing in the kitchen doorway. It wasn't a question. How can you be so sure, he challenged, pressing the brew button harder than necessary. Because deep down, you feel it too. The connection. She stepped closer, and he noticed that her movements had become more human overnight, as if she were quickly adapting to Earth's gravity and social cues. Last night, did you dream? Evan froze, coffee forgotten. He had dreamed, vividly, of floating in a sea that wasn't water, surrounded by lights that communicated in emotions rather than words. Of feeling completely whole, completely understood. That wasn't real, he insisted, even as uncertainty crept into his voice. Share it with me, Lyra said, extending her hand, palm up. Let me show you how to remember. No, Evan backed away. No more mind games. I need proof. Something concrete. Lyra's expression became thoughtful. She reached for the pendant hanging around her neck, a small crystal that pulsed with inner light. This contains memories. Would you like to see? Before he could answer, she pressed the crystal between her palms. It glowed brighter, then projected a three-dimensional scene into the air between them. Evan gasped, coffee mug slipping from his fingers and shattering on the floor. In the projection, he saw himself, or someone identical to him, standing on the shore of a silver sea. The sky above was emerald and violet, just like in his flash of memory. And beside this other Evan stood Lyra, their hands intertwined in a complex pattern, surrounded by ribbons of light. That's not possible, he whispered, but his denial lacked conviction. This was our bonding ceremony, Lyra explained, voice tender with remembrance. You came to Arvalis in dream state, but your consciousness was fully present. For 3 of your Earth years, you visited me whenever you slept deeply enough. The projection shifted, showing other Evan laughing, speaking in a language he didn't recognize, yet somehow understood. They were building something together, a small dwelling made of crystal and light. Our home, Lyra said, noticing his recognition. You designed it to remind you of Earth structures. Evan circled the projection, studying the scene from all angles. If this is true, why did I stop coming? Why did I forget? The light from the crystal dimmed, and Lyra's expression grew sad. There was a dimensional storm, a rare phenomenon that disrupts the barriers between realities. You were pulled back to Earth consciousness too abruptly. The shock was severe. Another scene materialized, Evan lying unconscious on the silver shore, Lyra kneeling beside him, her hands glowing as she pressed them to his temples. You were dying, she continued, voice tight with remembered fear. Your mind couldn't withstand the transition. I had to seal your memories of Arvalis to save you. But before you slipped away, you made me promise, her voice broke slightly, that if the connection between our worlds ever stabilized again, I would find you. That's why I'm here, Evan. The dimensional barriers thinned enough for physical passage. The projection faded, leaving them in the ordinary morning light of his kitchen. Coffee pooled around the broken mug at his feet, forgotten. If what you're saying is true, Evan said slowly, there must be evidence in my life, something I can verify. Lyra considered this. After the separation, did you experience changes? Dreams that felt too real? Art you created without understanding why? Evan's breath caught. In his bedroom closet was a stack of drawings he'd created during a strange 3-month period 4 years ago. Landscapes of impossible places, sketches of a woman with starlight in her hair. He'd attributed them to stress or perhaps a brief psychological episode. He'd never shown them to anyone. Wait here, he said, rushing to his bedroom. He dug through the closet until he found the portfolio, dust covering its surface. With trembling hands, he carried it back to the kitchen. Lyra's eyes widened at the sight of the first drawing, a perfect rendition of the silver sea from her memory projection. You remembered in fragments, she whispered, fingers hovering above the paper without touching it. Your conscious mind forgot, but your soul remembered. Evan flipped through drawing after drawing, alien landscapes, structures of crystal, and on every page, a woman with silver hair. Lyra's face captured in loving detail. This doesn't prove anything, he said weakly. Coincidence, subconscious influence from movies or books. But his protest sounded hollow even to his own ears. There is another way, Lyra suggested carefully. I could Try to restore a small memory. Just one. If you would permit it. Evan hesitated, staring at the drawings, his drawings, of a world he couldn't consciously remember. Fear warred with curiosity, denial with a growing sense that he was standing at the edge of discovering something profound about himself. One memory, he agreed finally. A small one. And if I say stop, I will stop immediately, Lyra promised. Trust has always been sacred between us. She raised her hands, hesitating before his face. May I? With a deep breath, Evan nodded. Her cool fingertips touched his temples, and the kitchen around them disappeared. Evan was standing on a cliff overlooking the Silver Sea. The air smelled of something like cinnamon and ozone, filling his lungs with vibrant energy. His body felt lighter here, as if gravity had loosened its hold. Beside him stood Lyra, younger somehow, her silver hair shorter, her expression more carefree. Will you teach me again? She was asking, voice playful. The Earth game with the flat wooden pieces? Chess, he heard himself reply with affection. You just want to beat me again. I enjoy watching how your mind works, she admitted, taking his hand. Her touch sent pleasant warmth through his arm. Your strategies reveal so much about human thinking. They walked along the cliff edge to a small alcove where a chess set waited, the pieces made of crystal that glowed from within. As they played, Lyra asked questions about Earth, about human emotions, about the concept of family. We Luminari are born of the collective energy, she explained, moving her knight. We have no parents as you understand them. This idea of two beings creating a third, it fascinates me. Is that why you're so interested in humans? He asked, countering her move. No, she said simply, eyes meeting his. I am interested in you, only you. The scene shifted. They were lying on their backs, floating just above the ground in a field of grass-like plants that chimed softly when brushed. Above them, 3 moons cast different colored lights across the landscape. If I could stay here forever, I would, his voice said, thick with emotion. Why can't you? Lyra asked, turning to face him. Others have made the transition permanent. My body is still on Earth, Lyra. My physical form. This is just my consciousness visiting. If I stayed completely, my body would die. And that matters to you. There was no judgment in her voice, only curiosity. I have family there, responsibilities, a life I've built. A lonely life, she observed gently. That is why your soul reached across dimensions in the first place. Searching. His past self had no response to that truth. The memory dissolved, and Evan found himself back in his kitchen, gasping as if he'd been underwater. Lyra's hands dropped from his temples, her expression anxious. Are you all right? She asked. I tried to choose something simple, non-traumatic. Evan gripped the counter to steady himself. The memory felt completely authentic, not like imagination or dream, but like recalling a vacation from his childhood. The sensory details were too precise, too consistent. That really happened, he said, not questioning anymore. We played chess on another world. Lyra nodded, relief softening her features. The first year you visited, you taught me many Earth games. But how? How did I even get there in the first place? He pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to process. Some humans have consciousness that naturally wanders during deep sleep, she explained. Most drift aimlessly through the cosmic planes. But you were deliberate, searching. Your consciousness found our dimension, found me. Evan lowered himself onto a kitchen chair, mind racing. If this was true, and increasingly, he couldn't deny it, what did it mean for his understanding of reality, of himself? The pod you arrived in, he said suddenly, it's still in my backyard. Anyone could see it. It will dissolve by midday, Lyra assured him. It's designed for one-way transport only. The atomic structure is already breaking down. Convenient, Evan muttered, then instantly regretted his skepticism when hurt flashed across Lyra's face. You always struggled with belief, she said quietly. Even in Arvalis, you questioned whether you were merely dreaming. It is the nature of your analytical mind. She was right, he realized. He'd always demanded proof, evidence, logical explanations, in all aspects of his life. It had made him an excellent programmer, but had also left him isolated, unwilling to take emotional risks without guaranteed outcomes. What happens now? He asked, voice rough. What exactly do you want from me? I want nothing you are unwilling to give, Lyra said, the honesty in her voice unmistakable. I came because our connection was reestablished, Because without it, my essence would eventually fade. And because she hesitated, vulnerability clear in her eyes. Because I missed you. The simple admission hit Evan with unexpected force. When was the last time anyone had missed him? His parents were distant, geographically and emotionally. He had colleagues but few friends. No romantic relationships had lasted beyond a few months, always ending when partners complained he seemed elsewhere, mentally. Had he been elsewhere, living a double life in dreams, with a connection so profound it made earthly relationships pale in comparison? I need time, he said finally. This is a lot. Time I can give, Lyra replied with a gentle smile. I have crossed galaxies to find you. I can wait while you remember. Over the next day, Evan found himself oscillating between acceptance and denial. One moment, he'd look at Lyra and feel an inexplicable sense of rightness, as if a missing piece had snapped into place. The next rational thought would reassert itself, and he'd find himself planning how to expose what must surely be an elaborate hoax. Lyra, for her part, gave him space while remaining a constant presence. She explored his house with childlike wonder, asking questions about the most mundane objects. The toaster fascinated her. The concept of soap made her laugh. Television she found primitive compared to the memory crystals of her world, but she watched it intently, absorbing human mannerisms and speech patterns. You're adapting quickly, Evan observed as they ate dinner. She had discovered she enjoyed the texture of pasta, if not its taste. Too quickly for someone allegedly from another dimension. Lyra twirled spaghetti around her fork with newfound dexterity. The bond between us allows me to access your knowledge base at a subconscious level. I'm not reading your mind, she added quickly, seeing his alarm. But certain basics, language, movement patterns, cultural norms, filter through naturally. Convenient again, Evan muttered. Would you prefer I remain alien? She asked with surprising directness. Would that make my presence easier or more difficult for you to accept? The question caught him off guard. Would he prefer that? Part of him wanted her to be more obviously foreign. It would create distance, make it easier to categorize her as other. But another part, no, he admitted reluctantly. I guess not. After dinner, he found her examining his workspace in the garage. The computers, the code on the screens, the diagrams and sticky notes covering the walls. You create worlds here, she observed. Digital realities. I program apps, he corrected. Mobile applications. Small utilities that solve specific problems. Lyra touched the screen, where lines of code glowed. But each is a reality, governed by rules you establish. In my world, this would be considered a form of creation magic. Despite himself, Evan smiled. It's just logic and mathematics, nothing magical about it. All magic is logic whose rules haven't been fully mapped, she countered with such conviction that he couldn't help but laugh. You sound like my college philosophy professor, from whom you got a B- because you argued too persistently that metaphysics was just physics we don't understand yet, she said, then froze, eyes wide. Evan stared at her. How did you know that? I never told anyone how much that grade bothered me. Lyra looked shaken. It came through the bond. A memory, your memory. She pressed her hand to her chest. It's strengthening, Evan. The more time we spend together, the more the connection regenerates. So you can read my mind now? Alarm edged his voice. No, not thoughts. Just fragments, important memories, things that shaped you. She looked genuinely distressed. I cannot control it yet. The bond is reestablishing itself naturally. Evan stepped back, needing distance. I need some air. He walked out into the backyard, breathing deeply of the night air. The spot where the pod had crashed was now just a slight depression in the earth. No trace remained of the alien vessel, as Lyra had predicted. Looking up at the stars, he felt suddenly, profoundly small. If what Lyra claimed was true, then reality was vastly more complex than humanity had imagined. Dimensions interwoven like fabric, consciousness capable of traversing cosmic distances, bonds that transcended physical space. Your world feels so solid, Lyra's voice came softly from behind him. So fixed. My reality is more fluid. Perception shapes existence there. Is that why you came here instead of me going back there? Evan asked without turning around. Partly, she admitted, moving to stand beside him. Also because the dimensional storm damaged the pathways your consciousness used to travel. They may never fully recover. They stood in silence, watching the stars. The night was clear, the moon nearly full. "May I show you something?" she asked after a while. "Something from my world?" Curiosity overcame caution, and Evan nodded. Lyra raised her hands toward the sky, and her skin began to glow brighter, the blue veins pulsing with increasing intensity. The air around them seemed to thicken, to shimmer with potential. And then, light. Not projected from her crystal this time, but emanating from her entire being. It expanded outward, enveloping them in a bubble of altered reality. Inside this sphere, the air took on a purplish hue, and gravity seemed to lessen. Evan felt himself lifting slightly off the ground. "What is this?" he gasped, flailing his arms to stabilize himself. "A pocket of my dimensional reality," Lyra explained, her voice resonating strangely in the altered space. "A temporary bridge. It cannot last long here. Your world's physical laws are too dominant." Around them, particles of light danced like fireflies, responding to their movements. When Evan waved his hand, they swirled in patterns that lingered, creating luminous trails. "In Arvalis, thought shapes reality," Lyra said, creating a complex geometric structure of light with just a gesture. Intention becomes form. Experimentally, Evan focused on the lights, imagining them forming a spiral. To his astonishment, they obeyed, spinning into the exact pattern he'd visualized. "I'm doing that," he whispered. "Your consciousness remembers," Lyra said, smiling, "the rules of my world." For several minutes, they played with the lights, creating increasingly complex patterns. Evan felt a strange joy bubbling up inside him, a sense of rediscovering something precious that had been lost. It felt right, natural, as if he'd been born to bend light with thought. Then, without warning, the bubble collapsed. The lights vanished, gravity reasserted itself, and Evan stumbled as his feet reconnected firmly with the ground. Lyra swayed, suddenly pale, the blue veins in her skin dimming. "Lyra!" He caught her before she could fall. "What's wrong?" "Creating the bridge takes considerable energy," she explained weakly. "I am not yet fully acclimated to your world's physical constraints." He helped her inside, settling her on the couch. Her skin felt cooler than before, her breathing shallow. "Was that worth it?" he asked, torn between concern and lingering amazement at what he'd experienced. Lyra's eyes met his, intense despite her weakness. "To see recognition in your eyes? Yes. Worth any cost." Something shifted in Evan's chest, a crack in the wall of doubt he'd built. Whatever else might be true or false, her feelings were genuine. No one could fake the depth of emotion he saw in her eyes. The willingness to exhaust herself just to show him a glimpse of her world. "Rest," he said, his voice gentler than before. He found himself adjusting the blanket around her shoulders, an oddly protective gesture. "We can talk more tomorrow." As he turned to leave, her hand caught his wrist, her touch sending that now familiar warmth through his skin. "Evan," she whispered, already half asleep, "thank you for not sending me away." He had no answer for that, so he simply nodded and retreated to his bedroom. But sleep eluded him as his mind replayed the sensation of bending light with thought, of temporary weightlessness, of Lyra's grateful eyes. If he were honest with himself, he hadn't seriously considered turning her in since she'd shown him the memory of the chess game. Something inside him, something that felt older and deeper than his conscious mind, recognized her as truth. Morning brought a new development. Evan awoke to find Lyra in the kitchen, surrounded by floating cups and plates. They orbited around her like miniature planets, responding to subtle movements of her fingers. "What are you doing?" he asked, alarmed at the casual display of impossible physics. The dishes clattered back onto the counter as her concentration broke. "Practicing control," she explained, looking embarrassed. "My abilities are fluctuating as I adjust to Earth's energy field." "You can't do that where someone might see," he warned, moving to close the kitchen blinds. "If anyone noticed—" "You're right," Lyra acknowledged, helping him secure the windows. "I must be more careful. Your world is not ready for knowledge of other dimensions." The casual way she said it, like a simple fact rather than an extraordinary claim, struck Evan anew. To her, multiple realities were everyday knowledge, as basic as gravity was to him. "I need to go out today," he said, reaching for the coffee. "I have a client meeting I can't miss." Lyra nodded. "I understand. I will remain here and continue adapting." Evan hesitated, coffee mug halfway to his lips. "Will you be here when I get back?" He wasn't sure which answer he was hoping for. "Where else would I go?" she asked simply. "You are my anchor in this world." The meeting was a disaster. Evan couldn't focus, his mind constantly drifting to Lyra, to dimensional physics, to chess games on alien cliffs. His client noticed, growing increasingly frustrated with his vague responses and distracted demeanor. "Reeds, what's going on with you?" demanded Marcus, the startup CEO who'd hired him to build a fitness tracking app. "This isn't like you. These mock-ups are half finished, and you've barely heard a word I've said." "Sorry," Evan mumbled, dragging his attention back to the present. "I've been dealing with some unexpected personal issues." Marcus's expression softened slightly. "Everything okay? You've always been reliable before." "It's complicated," Evan said, attempting a reassuring smile that felt more like a grimace. "But I'll get it sorted. Just need a couple more days on these designs." When he returned home, the house was quiet. Too quiet. "Lyra?" he called, a strange panic rising when she didn't immediately answer. He found her in the backyard, kneeling in a patch of sunlight, eyes closed. Around her the air shimmered slightly, and small objects, leaves, twigs, pebbles, hovered a few inches off the ground within a 3-foot radius of her body. "Lyra!" he hissed, glancing nervously at the neighboring houses. Someone could see. Her eyes opened slowly, and the objects gently settled back to earth. "I'm sorry," she said, voice distant. "I needed to harmonize with your world's energy field. My core was becoming unstable." Now that she mentioned it, he noticed she looked different. Her skin less vibrantly red, the blue veins dimmer. She looked more human, as if she were adapting not just behaviorally, but physically to Earth. "Are you okay?" he asked, offering a hand to help her up. "The integration is challenging," she admitted, taking his hand. The contact sent a jolt of energy between them, stronger than before. Evan gasped, and Lyra's eyes widened. "You felt that?" It wasn't a question. The connection between them had strengthened. He could feel it now, a subtle awareness of her presence, even when she wasn't touching him. "What's happening to us?" he asked, not letting go of her hand despite the unsettling energy flowing between them. "The bond is regenerating faster than I anticipated," Lyra said, looking both pleased and concerned. "Your consciousness remembers even if your mind does not." Inside, they sat across from each other at the kitchen table, hands still joined. Neither seemed willing to break the contact. "In your dimension," Evan began hesitantly, "what exactly did this bond mean?" "Between us?" Lyra's expression softened with memory. "Everything. It meant everything. The Luminari do not form exclusive pair bonds as humans do. Our existence is more communal, more fluid. But you were different. Your human consciousness, so individual, so intensely focused. When you chose me, it changed me." She paused, struggling to translate concepts that had no Earth equivalent. "I became more distinct, more singularly myself when bonded to you." "And what did you give me in return?" Evan asked, genuinely curious now. "Expansion," she said simply. "Your consciousness could experience beyond its natural limitations while connected to mine. You could perceive the world as we do, as energy, as potential, as endless possibility rather than fixed matter." The words resonated with something deep inside Evan, a hunger he'd always felt but never named, a sense that reality as he experienced it was somehow incomplete, a fraction of what it could be. "That's why I came to you in dreams," he murmured, the realization surfacing naturally. "My mind was searching for more." Lyra nodded, squeezing his hand. "Yes, you were always reaching beyond boundaries. It's the essential nature of your consciousness." The revelation struck Evan with unexpected force. All his life he'd felt restless, disconnected, as if something vital were missing. He'd thrown himself into work, into creating digital worlds where he controlled the rules, seeking something he couldn't articulate. Now looking at Lyra, at this impossible being who had crossed dimensions to find him, he wondered if what he'd been searching for had been searching for him too. "What do we do now?" Evan asked, voice barely above a whisper. The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Lyra considered his question carefully, her eyes never leaving his. "That depends on what you want, Evan. I came here hoping to restore our bond, but I won't force a connection you're not ready for." "And if I'm never ready?" he asked, the question sharper than he intended. "Then I will fade," she said simply, without self-pity. "Luminary cannot survive indefinitely separated from their bonded consciousness once the connection has been established. It would be a gentle ending." The thought of her fading, dying, sent an unexpected pang through Evan's chest. That's emotional blackmail, he said defensively. No, Lyra shook her head. It's just truth. I'm not telling you this to manipulate you. You asked what happens now, and I'm being honest about the possibilities. Evan pulled his hand away, needing to think clearly without the distracting current of energy between them. So my options are either accept this bond that I can't remember agreeing to, or be responsible for your death? You're simplifying something complex, Lyra said, a flash of frustration crossing her features. The bond exists whether you acknowledge it or not. It formed naturally between us, neither forced nor planned, and yes, without it, I will eventually fade. But that doesn't mean you must commit to something you don't feel. She rose from the table, moving to the window where afternoon light streamed in. Perhaps I was wrong to come here physically. Perhaps I should have tried to reach you in dreams again, rebuild our connection more gradually. Watching her silhouetted against the sunlight, Evan was struck by how vulnerable she appeared, despite her otherworldly nature. She was powerful enough to cross dimensions, yet here she stood, dependent on a connection he couldn't fully remember or understand. Show me more, he said suddenly, decisive. Not just fragments or projections. If we were truly bonded as deeply as you claim, I want to remember it. All of it. Lyra turned, surprise and caution warring in her expression. Full memory restoration could be overwhelming. The dimensional barrier damaged your mind once before. I need to know, Evan interrupted. I can't make any decisions based on pieces and fragments. If this bond is real, if it's as profound as you say, then I deserve to remember it, to feel it, to know what I'm either accepting or rejecting. Lyra studied him, weighing his determination against the risks. It would require deep connection, physical and mental contact more intimate than what we've shared so far. Like when you showed me the chess memory. Much deeper, she said seriously. That was a surface memory, easily accessible. What you're asking would involve complete synchronization of our energetic fields. It would be intense, and once done, it cannot be undone. You would remember everything. Evan swallowed hard but nodded. I still want to try. Night had fallen by the time they prepared. Lyra had requested certain arrangements. Cushions on the floor of the living room, all electric devices powered down to minimize interference. Candles for light rather than the harsh overhead fixtures. Luminary consciousness is sensitive to electromagnetic fields, she explained as Evan switched off the circuit breaker. The less electronic noise, the clearer the connection will be. In the candlelight, her skin took on a deeper crimson hue, the blue veins pulsing more visibly. She seemed more alien again, less adapted to Earth, as if she were allowing her true nature to surface now that they were committed to this path. Sit facing me, she instructed, settling cross-legged on the cushions. Evan mirrored her position, their knees touching. Now, I need you to focus on your breathing. Slow and deep. The human mind must be calm for dimensional barriers to thin. Evan closed his eyes, concentrating on his breath. In. Outside, slow and measured. He felt ridiculous at first, like he was participating in some New Age meditation rather than an alien consciousness merger. But gradually something shifted. The air around them seemed to thicken, to charge with potential. Good, Lyra murmured, her voice sounding somehow both closer and farther away. Now open your eyes, but don't focus on anything physical. Look through, not at. He opened his eyes to find the room transformed. Objects appeared less solid, more like collections of vibrating particles. The candle flames were no longer just orange and yellow, but complex symphonies of color his mind struggled to categorize. And Lyra, she was radiant. Her physical form remained, but it was now clearly just a vessel for the luminous energy that constituted her true self. She glowed from within, light pulsing in complex patterns that somehow felt like language. I can see you, he whispered in awe. The real you. And I, you, she replied, reaching forward to place her palms on either side of his face. Your consciousness is so bright, Evan. So uniquely structured. It's what drew me to you from the beginning. Her touch was electric, but not painful. It felt like coming home after a long absence. Familiar, right? Profound. Her forehead pressed against his, and the room around them dissolved. They were everywhere and nowhere, flowing through cosmic landscapes too vast for human perception. Evan felt his consciousness expanding, stretching beyond the limitations of his physical brain, accessing memories stored not in neurons, but in the very fabric of dimensional space. And then, they came. The memories. Not fragmented or isolated, but a continuous flow of experience. Years of connection, of growth, of discovery. Nights when his sleeping body remained on Earth while his consciousness soared through Arvalis with Lyra as his guide. Experiences beyond human language, perceiving time as a physical dimension he could move through, sensing the thoughts of crystalline beings that grew from the energy-rich soil of her world, learning to shape reality with focused intention, and underlying it all, the bond. It wasn't just emotional or spiritual, but fundamental, a resonance between their essential frequencies, a harmony that made them both more than they could be alone. In her dimension, they had built not just a dwelling, but a shared existence, their energies so intertwined that separation had been almost unthinkable. Until the storm came, a cosmic disturbance that tore through dimensional barriers like tissue paper. He remembered the pain now, the terrible wrenching sensation as his consciousness was forcibly dragged back to Earth, the psychic shock that nearly killed him, and Lyra's desperate act, using her own essence to shield his mind, knowing it would seal away his memories of her, of Arvalis, of everything they'd shared. Her final words to him as the connection frayed, "If the barrier's ever thin enough, I will find you. Wait for me in dreams, if nowhere else." The vision released him suddenly, dumping him back into his physical body with jarring abruptness. He gasped, lungs burning as if he'd been underwater too long. Across from him, Lyra slumped forward, exhausted by the effort of facilitating such deep remembrance. "Lyra!" he choked out, reaching for her instinctively. "I remember. Everything." Her eyes met his, filled with hope and uncertainty. "And now that you remember?" The question hung between them, but Evan needed no time to consider his answer. With the memories came the feelings, profound connection, understanding deeper than words, belonging in a way he'd never experienced in his human relationships. "Now I understand why nothing on Earth ever felt complete," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Why I've always felt like I was missing something essential. It was you. It's always been you." He pulled her into an embrace, the contact sending waves of resonant energy between them. The bond, fully awakened now, pulsed with renewed strength. Evan could feel it, a living connection tying his consciousness to hers, across dimensions, across species, across the divide between matter and energy. "I was so afraid you wouldn't remember," Lyra whispered against his shoulder, "that the human part of you would reject what we shared as impossible." "Parts of it still seem impossible," Evan admitted with a small laugh. "My logical mind is screaming that this can't be real. But I know it is. I feel it." He pulled back slightly to look at her. "What happens to us now? You can't stay on Earth indefinitely, can you? And I can't exist fully in Arvalis without abandoning my physical body here." Lyra's expression grew thoughtful. "There may be a way, not perfect, but possible, a hybrid existence." Dawn found them still talking, planning, imagining possibilities. With his memories restored, Evan's resistance had melted away, replaced by a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The world looked different to him now, less solid, more malleable, full of potential he hadn't perceived before. "The bond allows for consciousness transfer in both directions," Lyra explained as they watched the sunrise from the porch steps. "Before, you came to me in dreams. Now that I'm physically here, we can establish a more stable connection." "Meaning what exactly?" Evan asked, marveling at how the morning light played through her now visible energy field, something he couldn't have perceived before the memory restoration. "Meaning we can exist in both dimensions simultaneously, with varying degrees of presence. Your physical body would remain here, but your consciousness could be more fully present in Arvalis than before. And I," she gestured to her physical form, "can maintain this manifestation here on Earth while keeping my essential energy rooted in my home dimension. Like quantum entanglement," Evan mused, "existing in two states at once." Lyra smiled. "A simplified analogy, but yes, the physics of consciousness are not so different from quantum physics in principle." The practicalities would be complex, they both knew. Evan still had a life here. Work commitments, a small circle of acquaintances who would notice if he suddenly started behaving strangely, and Lyra would need to adapt further to survive on Earth without drawing unwanted attention. "I'll need to modify my appearance," she said, studying her red-tinged skin and the visible blue energy veins. "Humans would find my natural form disturbing." "Can you do that? Change how you look?" Lyra nodded. "My physical manifestation is semi-fluid. With concentration, I can alter its appearance, though the underlying energy structure remains the same. Evan watched in fascination as she closed her eyes, focusing intently. Gradually, her skin tone shifted from red to a more human peach color. The blue veins faded from view, though he could still sense their energy pulsing beneath the surface. Her silver hair darkened slightly to a more plausible platinum blonde. When she opened her eyes, they remained violet but with less obvious luminescence. "Better?" she asked, examining her hands. "More human," Evan acknowledged, "though I think I prefer your natural appearance." Lyra smiled, the expression warming her now more human-looking features. "In private, I can return to my true form, but for navigating your world, this will draw less attention." They spent the day making plans. Evan would need to redesign his work schedule, creating more time for the consciousness-sharing exercises that would strengthen their bond. Lyra would need a cover story, documentation, a plausible explanation for her sudden appearance in his life. "I can manipulate certain perceptions," she said when he raised the issue of legal identification. "Not large-scale or permanent, but enough to prevent casual questioning." "Mind control?" Evan asked, half joking, half concerned. "Energy influence," she corrected. "Similar to how you bend light with thought in Arvalis. I can bend perception slightly here. It's not perfect or ethical to overuse, but for safety and integration, it may be necessary." As evening approached, they prepared for the first deliberate consciousness sharing since his memory restoration. This time, Evan knew what to expect, understood the process, embraced the connection rather than fighting it. They sat facing each other on his bed, hands joined, eyes locked. "Focus on the bond," Lyra instructed. "Feel it as a bridge between dimensions." Evan closed his eyes, concentrating on the energy connection he could now perceive clearly, a shimmering thread linking his core to hers. As he focused, the thread expanded, became a pathway, a tunnel of light connecting Earth to somewhere else. And then he was there. Not fully, not physically, but his consciousness stood on the shores of the Silver Sea, while his body remained seated on his bed in California. The dual awareness was disorienting at first, feeling the softness of his bedding beneath his physical body, while simultaneously feeling the strange, not quite sand of Arvalis between his energetic toes. "You're doing it," Lyra's voice came from both directions, from her physical form before him on Earth, and from her more radiant self beside him in Arvalis. Maintaining dual consciousness is difficult at first, but it becomes natural with practice. In Arvalis, everything was as he remembered: the emerald and violet sky, the silver sea that moved with thought rather than tide, the distant crystalline structures that served as dwellings for the luminary. But something was different too. The landscape seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, responding to his partial presence. "The dimensional storm changed things," Lyra explained, noticing his observation. "The barriers are thinner now in certain places. Your energy signature affects Arvalis more directly than before." They walked along the shore, or rather his consciousness walked while his physical body remained in deep meditation on Earth. The sensation was liberating, expansive, like being freed from gravity and physical limitation. "We built our dwelling there," Lyra pointed to a crystalline structure nestled in a grove of chime plants. "It still exists, waiting for us." Emotion welled up in Evan's consciousness, the recognition of home, of belonging, of purpose beyond the mundane existence he'd been living. Here, in this impossible place between dimensions, he felt complete in a way Earth life had never provided. "I want this," he said, the words emerging from both his physical mouth on Earth and his energetic presence in Arvalis. "Both worlds, both realities, with you." Lyra's joy radiated like sunlight, warming him across dimensions. "It will not be easy," she cautioned. "Maintaining dual existence requires constant balance." "Nothing worthwhile is easy," Evan replied, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "And this, us, is more worthwhile than anything I've known." The transition back to full Earth consciousness was smoother this time, less jarring. Evan opened his eyes to find tears streaming down his face, not from pain but from overwhelming emotion, from the recognition of what had been missing in his life. Lyra reached up to brush away his tears, her touch gentle. "Welcome back." "I never really left before, did I?" he asked. "All those years I thought I was just depressed or disconnected from life. I was actually missing half of my existence." She nodded. "The bond was damaged but never broken. Part of you always reached for Arvalis, for me. That's why you felt incomplete." Evan took her hands in his, marveling at how natural it felt now. "We'll make this work," he promised. Whatever it takes. The next weeks brought challenges neither had fully anticipated. Maintaining dual consciousness was exhausting for Evan, like exercising muscles he'd never used before. Some days he could barely sustain the connection for minutes. Other days he could spend hours with his awareness split between dimensions. Lyra faced her own struggles adapting to Earth. Human emotions were more volatile than luminary energy patterns, human bodies more demanding in their needs. Simple things, temperature changes, loud noises, crowded spaces, overwhelmed her senses accustomed to the more fluid, responsive environment of Arvalis. "How do you bear it?" she asked one evening after they'd ventured to a grocery store, her first real exposure to human crowds. So many dissonant energies, all clashing together. So much solidity. Evan had never thought about how oppressive physical reality might seem to a being accustomed to a more energy-based existence. "We don't know any different," he explained, helping her regulate her breathing as she had taught him. "Humans are designed for this level of density." But for every challenge, there were moments of breakthrough and wonder. Lyra experienced her first ice cream cone and laughed with childlike delight at the cold sensation. Evan grew more adept at maintaining his connection to Arvalis while going about his daily life, coding with half his consciousness while the other half floated in the silver sea. They developed a rhythm. Mornings were for Earth. Evan would work while Lyra explored human culture through books, television, and internet, carefully supervised to prevent her energy from disrupting the electronics. Evenings were for Arvalis, consciousness-sharing sessions that grew longer and deeper, allowing them to exist together in her world while their physical forms remained safely on Earth. Marcus, Evan's client, was pleasantly surprised by the sudden improvement in his work. "Whatever personal issues you were dealing with, I'm glad you sorted them out," he said during their weekly check-in. "These designs are better than anything you've submitted before. There's something intuitive about the user experience." Evan smiled, knowing the truth, that his expanded consciousness was revolutionizing his approach to design. Seeing multiple possibilities simultaneously, understanding user experience on both physical and energetic levels, perceiving patterns invisible to normal human awareness, all gifts of his strengthened bond with Lyra. At home, their connection deepened daily. Lyra's presence gradually transformed Evan's Spartan living space. Plants appeared, Earth varieties that reminded her of Arvalis flora. Colors brightened the walls. Music played more often. She had an insatiable curiosity about human artistic expression. And at night, when their consciousnesses intertwined most completely, they rebuilt their dwelling in Arvalis, restoring the home they had created together before the dimensional storm tore them apart. "It feels more real now," Evan observed as they stood in their completed Arvalis dwelling, his consciousness fully present while his body slept on Earth. "More stable." "The bond strengthens both sides of the connection," Lyra explained. "As we heal the damage done by the storm, both worlds become more accessible, more integrated." Integration. The word took on new meaning as their dual existence stabilized. They were creating something unprecedented, a life-spanning dimensions, bridging realities that were never meant to touch. On Earth, Evan found himself perceiving energy fields around people, seeing the luminous patterns of consciousness that humans normally missed. In Arvalis, he could manipulate energy with increasing skill, creating structures and effects that awed even the native luminary. "You're becoming something new," Lyra told him one night as they lay on the roof of his house stargazing. "Neither fully human nor luminary, but a bridge between." "And you?" he asked, studying the way starlight played across her skin, now capable of shifting between human appearance and her natural luminary form at will. "I am changing too," she acknowledged, "becoming more individuated, more physically grounded. The other luminary would barely recognize me now." There was sadness in her voice, the cost of her choice to find him, to exist in his world as well as hers. Evan reached for her hand, the contact sending familiar warmth through his arm. "Do you regret it?" he asked softly. "Coming here." Lyra turned to face him, her eyes shifting to their natural, luminescent violet. "Never. This bond, you, are worth any adaptation, any sacrifice." The certainty in her voice dispelled his doubts. Whatever they were becoming together, whatever challenges lay ahead, they were traveling this unprecedented path together. Two beings from different dimensions finding a way to exist in both worlds rather than choosing between them. 3 months after Lyra's arrival, they reached a new plateau in their bond. The distinction between Earth consciousness and Arvalis consciousness began to blur, not in confusion but in harmonious integration. Evan could maintain awareness in both dimensions simultaneously without strain, and Lara had mastered physical existence on Earth while keeping her essential nature intact. "It's like being bilingual," Evan explained to her as they prepared dinner together, a domestic scene made extraordinary by the subtle glow emanating from Lyra's hands as she chopped vegetables. "Moving between dimensions now feels as natural as switching languages. The human brain is remarkably adaptable," Lyra observed, "more so than even my people believe possible. You were never meant to perceive multiple realities simultaneously, yet here you are, doing exactly that." They had developed new abilities neither had anticipated. Evan could now perceive the energy signatures of other humans, reading emotional states and intentions that had always been invisible to him before. Lyra had developed unprecedented control over her physical manifestation, able to appear completely human when necessary while maintaining her true nature beneath the surface. Their dwelling in Arvalis had become a point of fascination for other luminary, who had never witnessed such stable connection between dimensions. Some came to observe, to learn from the unique bridge they had created between worlds. "They think we're an anomaly," Lyra told Evan after one such visit, "a cosmic accident that shouldn't be possible." "Aren't we?" he asked, half joking. "No," she said with certainty. "We are the beginning of something, a prototype for a new kind of connection between realities." On Earth, Evan's life had transformed. Work that once consumed him now occupied a smaller, more balanced portion of his time. He had started teaching, sharing his design knowledge with students who found his intuitive approach to digital spaces revolutionary without understanding its interdimensional origins. And Lyra had begun creating art, sculptures that existed simultaneously as physical objects on Earth and energy constructs in Arvalis, bridging the dimensions in tangible form. Her work attracted attention for its otherworldly qualities that viewers couldn't quite define but felt deeply. One evening, as sunset painted the sky in colors that reminded Evan of Arvalis, they sat on the porch steps of what had become truly their home, not just his house. "I've been thinking," Evan said, his fingers intertwined with hers, "about what happens next." Lyra turned to him, curious. They had been living day by day, focusing on strengthening their bond and adapting to their dual existence. The future had remained largely undiscussed. "The bond is stable now," he continued, "strong enough that neither of us is at risk if we explore further." "What are you suggesting?" Lyra asked, sensing the direction of his thoughts. "I want to meet others like us," Evan said. "There must be more humans whose consciousness wanders in dreams, more luminary who have sensed Earth. We can't be the only ones who've formed connections across dimensions." Lyra's expression grew thoughtful. Such connections would be rare, but not impossible. The dimensional barriers have always been thinnest during dream states. "We could be guides," Evan suggested, enthusiasm building in his voice. "Help others navigate what we've figured out through trial and error. Create a community of bridge builders between worlds." The idea took root between them, growing through their bond until it felt less like a new concept and more like remembering a purpose they'd always known but temporarily forgotten. "It would be challenging," Lyra cautioned. "Most humans resist the expansion of consciousness. Most luminary fear the density of physical existence." "We were afraid too at first," Evan reminded her, "but look at what we've created together." He gestured around them, not just at the physical house, but at the invisible energy field they had generated, a bubble of interdimensional space where both could exist fully as themselves. Lyra smiled, the expression lighting her features from within. "Always the innovator," she said fondly. "Even in Arvalis, you were never content with what was, always imagining what could be." "Is that a yes?" he asked, squeezing her hand. "It's a beginning," she replied, "as we were a beginning, as this bond was a beginning." They sat in comfortable silence as twilight deepened around them. In another reality, simultaneously, they stood on the shores of the Silver Sea, watching 3 moons rise over the crystalline landscape of Arvalis. 2 bodies, 2 locations, one shared consciousness spanning the divide between dimensions. Evan felt complete in a way he'd never imagined possible before Lyra crashed into his backyard. Whole, not because he'd found his missing half, but because he'd discovered the vastness of his own potential, the capacity to exist beyond the limitations he'd always accepted as immutable. "You know," he said after a while, "when you first arrived and told me we were soul bonded, I thought it was the strangest thing I'd ever heard." "And now?" Lyra asked, her violet eyes reflecting starlight. Now I think it's the only thing that makes sense, Evan replied, as if my entire life was leading to this point, this existence between worlds. Lyra leaned against him, her energy harmonizing with his in that now familiar resonance. Perhaps it was. Perhaps all paths across all dimensions led us here. Above them, stars emerged in the darkening sky, the same stars visible from Earth and from Arvalis, though from vastly different perspectives. In that moment, Evan knew with unshakable certainty that they had created something unprecedented yet inevitable, a bridge between realities that would forever change both their worlds. Not an ending, but a completion. And with completion, the foundation for something new to begin. Ready to see what's next? He asked, both on Earth and in Arvalis simultaneously. Lyra's answer came through their bond before her words formed, a resonance of absolute certainty. Always.